Okay, this is our first chapter on contracts. We're going to have the 3 chapters about contracts, 8, 9, and 10. So I'm going to do a lecture about chapter 8 today. So there are 4 different elements of contracts, which by the way is your homework, right? That you have to remember, and I will explain them and they'll come up during the slides as well, but I'm just going to provide a brief explanation of these right now. In order for a contract to be valid by law or enforceable by law, meaning if somebody doesn't do their part, you have a legal right to try to enforce it in court, right? All these 4 elements have to be present. If only one of them is missing, you may not be able to enforce it in court, right? So one of them is agreement. In order for a contract to exist, at least 2 parties have to agree to something, right? And I'll explain different ways how throughout the lecture how agreement can be expressed, right? Yeah. The next one is consideration, and meaning you have to, in order for you to consider to enter a contract, there has to be some kind of value you're getting out of it, some exchange, right? If I give my child a present, there's no contract that says present, it's a gift. I'm not getting anything in return, right? But if I say to my child, I'm going to pay your tuition, but you have to keep a 3.0 average GPA minimum. And if you don't, I will stop paying your tuition. I would never do that, by the way. That would be a contract if my child agrees to it, right? So so because now I'm getting something out of it. What am I getting out of it? Oh, whatever you want to call it, the satisfaction that my child has is getting an education. I'm asking for something in return, right? Contractual capacity, you have to have capacity to understand the terms of a contract, and you cannot be mentally incapable of understanding, right? And legality is whatever the contract subject matter is, has to be legal. You cannot enforce a contract in court if the contract is about an illegal drug deal or a bounty hunter. That's against public policy, right? That's illegal, no matter how many contracts you sign. If you have a contract that somebody is going to deliver you X amount of cocaine and they don't deliver, you can't take them to court. It was illegal, right? Yeah. So those are the 4 elements of the contract. This is also what your homework is about, right? Let's look at the type of contracts. There are bilateral versus unilateral contracts. Bilateral contracts is promise in exchange for a return promise, right? I'm going to give you this, you're going to give me that. If I sell my car, my promise is that I'm going to give you my car, and the party that is buying my car, his or her promise is to give me a certain amount of money. So a promise for a promise. That is a bilateral contract, at least 2 people involved, right? A unilateral contract is an offer that can be accepted only by the offeree's performance. So I am offering to sell something on Craigslist. I'm offering my car on Craigslist for a certain amount of money, $10,000. Lots of people are going to see that. A lot of people are going to think that's too much, or I don't have that, whatever. But the person that accepts that offer, that they're now agreeing to the terms. Yes, I like the car. Yes, $10,000 is good. So it's not a contract until it has been accepted. Just because you saw it on Craigslist doesn't mean you're going to enter into the contract. But if you accept the terms, right? Or you perform, you give me the money. Another example would be lottery. The lottery. They advertise, if you win, this is the jackpot this week. I don't know, is it weekly or daily? I have no idea. I don't play lottery, but if you get the 6 numbers as the only person, this is the amount of money you can win, or you will win, right? All you have to do is get the 6 numbers. That's your performance that you have to do. You have to pull or pick the 6 numbers. It's hard, hardly ever anybody does, but that is another example of a unilateral contract. Somebody's offering something and you have to perform something. That's probably a better actually explanation of the unilateral contracts than the one about the car and the Praxis, right? Revocation of offers for unilateral contracts. I can offer, I can make an offer to the public, and then I can revoke the offer. I can say this offer is no longer valid. However, if somebody has substantially performed, I can't then revoke it. So if I say, I'm gonna pay $100,000 to anybody who swims from Fisherman's Wharf to Alcatraz, right? And then somebody super fit swimmer comes and starts swimming across. They're 70% through. I can't say, okay, offer no longer valid. They're almost done, right? So there are some rules about that as well. We'll talk more about formal and informal contracts. It depends on the formation, well, how much communication was done, and you know, the way you formed the contract, written and so forth, right? We'll talk more about that. Express versus implied contract. Requirements for implied contracts are, you know, some of them, some contracts happen not because you can, I mean, you can enter into a contract without even saying a word, or without agreeing on the exact terms, right? Can somebody give and that would be an implied contract. Yes, you can enter into a contract without specifically stating you're entering into a contract. It's implied that you have a contractual relationship by behavior. You're going to a restaurant and the server is offering you appetizers and bringing maybe a plate of appetizers and telling you can pick whichever you want, and you pick them. It's implied that you're going to pay, right? So those kind of things. It's a simple scenario, but yes.
How does, in terms of like employment, how does a verbal agreement kind of factor into that? It doesn't have any legal binding, like say like you have a verbal acceptance of an offer.
Of an employment offer, yeah.
But verbal acceptance is not legally binding, right?
Of course it is.
It is?
Of course, absolutely. Contracts don't have to be in writing. Only certain contracts have to be in writing. And we'll get that, I think that might be chapter 9, when we talk about which contracts must be in writing to be valid. But a lot of contracts we enter into that are in writing could just be verbal. They're just putting them in writing. The businesses are doing that to cover themselves.
Okay.
And you know, it's sometimes easier because now you have all the terms written down, right? Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I'm just wondering if like, is it a he said, like they said situation?
It can be a he said, she said, or he said, hers, whatever, you know, whoever's involved. It can be, but you have to prove it.
Okay.
You can't just say, they offered me this, I accepted, and now they're not giving it to me. You can't, you know, you have to prove it, right? And there are ways to prove it. Sometimes there aren't. That's why people prefer a written contract, right? Yeah. And some of them are mixed with, some of it is written and some of it is implied, right? Yeah. Important factor, executed versus executory contracts. People always automatically assume that a contract is executed once both parties signed. That contract has not been executed. What does executed mean? Executed means it has been performed. The contract has ended. When I sell my car and we agree on everything, and I get the money transferred into my account, you know, we sign it, I get the money transferred, I haven't delivered the car yet. It's executory. I still have to do something to fully perform the contract. If I hire somebody to paint my house and we agree, and we have a nice written contract, every possible scenario is covered, we agree on everything, and the painter starts painting. The contract is executory until my house is finished being painted and until I paid in full. Yes, Diego.
For executory, could quality of the job be factored in?
No.
No.
Unless there's something spelled out and you are not performing what you spelled out. Let's say the type of paint that's being used. If it's spelled out what type of paint is being used, but you're using a different kind of paint, then it's a problem. But if it doesn't say what type of paint, if it just says paint my house white, there's so many tones on white, by the way.
Oh, I didn't mean like in type, like terms of like what kind of materials they use. I meant in like the quality of the job. So like, you know, like.
Industry standards.
Yeah,
I think it would have to be industry standards. You're not just gonna slop paint on the walls or
Yeah.
whatever, right? It's gotta be industry standards. You can't just, leave stains or unpainted sections or anything.
so that's enforceable. It's like, hey.
That would be
you-
enforceable.
Yeah, you like.
Yeah. It would be, you would look at industry standards and you would look at what does a reasonable person expect when they get a paint job done, right? Yeah. So,
Yeah, so you
Does-
can that part be also implied in the contract? It's implied of like, hey, do your, like, do the paint job.
yes, it's kind of implied, if you hire a painter, it's implied that they're going to do a professional painting job.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good point, yes. Contract enforceability, some contracts are avoidable, a contract that may be legally avoided at the option of one or both parties, that those contracts are called voidable, right? Unenforceable contracts would be a valid contract rendered unenforceable by some statutes or law. As I mentioned earlier, and we'll cover that in chapter 9, writing requirements. Some contracts cannot be enforced because they had to be in writing, period. And they don't count if they're not in writing. The parties can then agree, okay, if they still both want to enforce the contract, they're just going to then write it down. But it won't be enforceable until then. Void contracts, a contract that has no legal force or binding effect, any illegal contract, where the subject matter is illegal. Diego?
I'm just asking this because I like saw it in a movie and I didn't know if it was correct or not. But like, there's a person who entered into a binding contract, but they lied about their age, so that they were actually a minor when they signed the contract. And by laws of California, a minor can't enter
can't.
into a legal contract without parental
So hold that right there because that's incorrect, but we will cover that in chapter 9 as well.
Okay.
Minors can enter into a contract, but the business cannot enforce it.
Got it.
Yeah, but you can. So if they lie, that's fraudulent misrepresentation.
So it's not, it can still be enforceable then, right?
It can be enforceable, or there could be some legal recourse that the other party can take because a minor misrepresented him or herself, probably with a fake ID, I would assume, right? People buy alcohol with a fake ID, so that's fraudulent misrepresentation, and yeah. All right, next, quasi contracts, an obligation or contract imposed by law in the absence of an agreement to prevent the unjust enrichment of one party. So our legal system, the purpose of our legal system is to make everything fair for everybody, right? Nobody should be unfairly compensated or should be deprived of things that they deserve, right? Or should get compensation without deserving it, right? That's the point. And that's why something like a quasi contract exists. Quasi means as if. I think it comes from Latin, right? These parties behave as if there's a contract. The example in the textbook was Seawest versus Copenhagen. So Seawest was a water company, like, we have Santa Clara Water. I don't know what it is here in San Mateo, right? What water company we use here, but a utility company essentially, right? And there was this homeowner, property owner, Copenhagen, who does not live in the incorporated area where the water is distributed to. It's an unincorporated, but so not in the limits where they supply water to. But this person still receives water from the water company and pays the bill too for years. And then the water company has to upgrade and makes an assessment. So all the people that receive water have to pitch in some so that they can upgrade the equipment. And Copenhagen refuses and says, I don't have a contract. I don't have any obligation to do that. And the water company sues them and wins the case because the courts decide there was a quasi contract. Any questions about that? Okay. There's always something that you have to decide with any really recovery, how much can be awarded to the winning party, right? Yeah. So, and then when an actual contract exists, but they're not a quasi contract, but damaged party can still sue. So, when sometimes contracts will specify the types, the amounts that can be recovered when something goes wrong and things like that, right? When there's an actual contract. Okay, we did talk about agreement. One of the first thing on the first slide, something that has to be present in order for a contract to be valid. There must be a serious objective intention by the offerer. I'm really annoyed with my car right now. One of the warning lights came on, and it's probably the electronics because it's an older car and stuff. It's probably worth $15,000, but I'm so annoyed with it. Anybody here wants to buy it for $100? Of course, there's no serious intent, right? Yeah. So there has to be serious intent and by the offerer. The terms of the offer must be reasonable, certain, or definite, so the parties and the court can ascertain the term of the contract. I can say, I'll offer you my car for a really low price. And you say, okay, I'll take it. There's no contract, there's no definite term. I have to put a dollar amount on it, right? And the offer must be communicated to the offeree, obviously, right? If I offer something to somebody, I have to communicate that. That's kind of a no-brainer. That's part of agreement. So an offer has to be made, and there has to be intention, expression of opinion. Okay, I'm not going to skip that. A statement of future intent. I don't want to go through into every case. You should be reading the cases in the textbook, right? Because I'm going to put this lecture online as well for future classes, and I don't want to make them too long. But anyway, statement of future intent. You're going to do this in the future, right? There can be preliminary negotiations where there's a back and forth. I offer my car for $10,000. You say, well, you got to haggle. What is what I'm trying to say? Haggling is really negotiations. I'll give you 9,000. I'll say, can we agree on 9,500? And you say deal. That's haggling, right? That's kind of negotiating. You're going to have some preliminary negotiations. If it's a unilateral offer, there will be advertisements. You can advertise products for sale and online, catalogs, circulars, and so forth. And then you're going to agree. You have an agreement to agree on the terms. And those are your preliminary agreements. And the larger the subject matter of the contract, the more of this is going to happen. Sale of a car, probably not that much, but if you're hiring a contractor to build you a house, there might be a lot of this. And it has to be definite. It must include the identification of the parties. Who are the parties entering into the contract? Their names and identities, right? And the identification of the object or subject matter. I have to say which car it is. Probably put the VIN number in the contract. Or something that identifies the car. Maybe the license plate number might be enough. But something where we know if you're buying property, there's a parcel number that is recorded with the county that the property is in. That's how you can identify, you can use an address or you can use a parcel number, right? The consideration to be paid, the dollar amount, right? Time, payment, and delivery or the performance, right? When is this transaction going to happen? Or if it's a service contract, how long is this good for? If you're signing up for a gym membership, is it a monthly membership, or do you just have to give a 30-day cancellation notice, or are you signing up for a whole year? And you can't cancel within a year, or maybe there will be a big penalty if you cancel. So that's the time limit of the contract and the payment, and when the payments are expected, things like that, right? Termination of the offer, a termination by action of the offer, I'm pulling this, no longer offering this. Or by the offeree, they don't want to accept this anymore. There can be counter offers. That's again, something kind of like haggling, bartering, I don't like this, but I think that's too much, but I'm gonna offer you this instead. Right? And then sometimes there's termination by operation of law. You put an offer out, when you do business to business sales, you're offering a potential customer some kind of supplies that you're going to supply for a certain amount of money. Let's say you're a salmon fisher. You fish salmon, and you're offering a restaurant. You're making a proposal to a restaurant that you will sell them X amount of salmon every week for this amount of money. And the restaurant says, okay, I'll think about it. A year later, they come back, and now there's a salmon shortage. And salmon has become very expensive, where it's no longer, a year anyway, it's really, prices will change even without the shortage, right? So, but after a reasonable amount of time, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, that was a long time ago. You can't go by that offer anymore. A lot of times when companies make offers like that, they will put under the offer, this offer is valid for 14 days. 14 days is very common, right? Yeah. Termination, okay, so others, destruction of a specific subject matter. If I offer to sell my car, but then my car gets stolen and whoever steals it gets into an accident, the car is no longer worth anything, right? That even though I promised to sell it to somebody, that would mean the offer, it's now terminated, the offer is terminated. Death or incompetence, if it's especially if it's a service thing, or supervening illegality, if there was anything previously or afterwards that made it illegal, right? There are some irrevocable offers. Read that in the textbook, right? Acceptance is also still part of agreement, right? Unequivocal acceptance is easy. You can have silence as acceptance, right? Don't say anything. Just like the example in the restaurant, or you get your hair done, and you sit at the hair salon, and they're done cutting, and then they start blow drying it. You don't say anything, but the blow drying charge could be different. Because you didn't say no, or you didn't stop them, that is acceptance, and you have to pay for it, right? They didn't say it was complimentary. You have to communicate. Acceptance has to be, sometimes it has to be communicated, depending on the type of offer. Mode and timeliness of acceptance. There's something called the mailbox rule. Acceptance is valid when it is dispatched through the mail. So that when you accept an offer and they say, sign this and send this back, the moment you put it in the mail is when the offer is now officially accepted, not when the person receives the acceptance, right? There's now a big workaround it. Everything is done electronically.
Like back in the day, the magazine subscriptions.
Yes.
You would just fill that little note, send it out.
That's it, yes. It's not that's relevant anymore. Now they will just send you a document and use DocuSign or tools like that where you're going to sign it, right? Yeah. Usually you have to, the offerer puts some authorized means of communication. This is how you can accept the offer, and sometimes there are substitute methods. Instead of one way to accept it, there might be another way to be able to accept the offer. I can't think of anyone now, but the important part is that it is communicated and it is received by the offerer. So I offer something. If you accept it, you have to make sure I receive your acceptance. E-contracts, online offers, they are displaying the offer as online, pretty obvious, right? You read it online, and then provisions include the acceptance of terms, right? By accepting, you agree to all of those terms. Who reads all those terms? A lot of us don't, right? Yeah. Rule of thumb for me is if I buy for a company that I've done business with, a large company that is it's a good reputation, I don't read it. But if it's somebody online that I've never done business with, I will probably read it, right? Especially when it comes to cancellation policies, right? Return policies when you're purchasing things. That's why I love buying from Amazon because their return policy is so lax.
Right.
Anyway, any disclaimers, limitation on remedies. If there's ever a dispute between us after we enter into the contract, there's a limitation of what you can recover, right? Privacy policies and dispute resolution. Dispute resolution is basically when you're signing something like a mediation or arbitration agreement, right? Where you're saying, I'm not ever going to sue you in court, no matter what goes wrong, right? I agree to use an arbitrator, a third party that's going to solve it rather than going to court. We did talk about arbitration agreements in chapter 2. So if you need to refresh that, go back to chapter 2. But a lot of contracts have arbitration agreements. They want to avoid lawsuits because lawsuits are very expensive for both sides. Dispute settlement provision. I don't remember that case. You can look it up online again, right? But forum selection clause, a provision in a contract designating the court jurisdiction which will decide disputes. So if you enter into a contract, in this case, somebody sued Google, but Google's contract said any disputes will be settled in Santa Clara County courthouses. So they can't sue anywhere else, right? There are click-on agreements, right? An agreement that arises when online buyers click on yes, I agree, right? Of course, you get the chance to read the details. Then there are shrink wrap agreements, where terms are located inside of a packaged box of goods. They shrink wrap agreements and enforceable contract terms. They're enforceable, right? So you basically agree to the terms when you open the package, really. That's what that means, right? Browse wraps as terms presented when online buyers download products. Right? You download software, you download an app on your phone. You download a movie. Yes.
At least for agreements that are physically on a product,
Mhm.
Could there be an argument to like accessibility issues of people who have like dyslexia or people who have like are blind or not blind but are like have a vision impairment and things like that it wasn't stated clearly?
Yeah, what do you guys think? What do you think? Can you say, well, I have dyslexia, I didn't understand the terms of this contract and get out of it? Yes, but let's say you can prove you've been diagnosed with dyslexia.
You would get out of it, right?
No,
You know?
no, you can't just say, I didn't understand it because I have dyslexia. There will be other ways to offer the information. They have to be ADA, they could make sure that they're ADA compliant. So it's a little far-fetched saying, I have dyslexia, I didn't get this. I thought it was 01 and not 10 or something like that, right? Yes.
What about if it's in a different language or if you agree to a contract? Except
You can't agree to anything you don't understand. If you do, that's your fault. Yeah. If you don't understand the terms, you have to tell them you don't understand the terms, and you can ask them. Do you have a audio file of this contract? And they may provide it. Right? If it's a verbal contract, you have to understand. If you can't hear that, there will be a sign language interpreter that can give you the terms, right? Yeah. But if you sign it, that means you're agreeing to it and you're saying, I understand and I agree to it. That's what your signature means.
I was just thinking more of like shrink wrap
Same thing.
agreements because those are like really, really tiny.
They are really tiny. I know nowadays you can go online and find it online too.
Okay.
So that's probably, yeah, so with the shrink wrap, yeah, that would probably be an option. That's probably says you can also get it here, right?
Yeah, because I know like there are some
That's fine.
institutions now that are claiming that like accessibility things have to be like 16-point font, has to be certain things, and I'm like, that's no way 16-point font, like. not even
No, and
close.
then, the amount of documents you have to use.
Yeah,
If you look at, you buy over-the-counter Advil painkillers or something like that, all that tiny print, that's hard to read. Imagine if you have to put that in 16 size fonts. That would be a huge package, right?
I think some people are using barcodes now,
Yes, yeah,
or like
barcodes.
QR.
QR codes, yeah. They could probably add the QR code and say, if you want to read it online, here you go, right, yeah. Consideration quickly is there has to be legally sufficient value. The consideration must be something in value in the eyes of the law that may consist of any of the following. A promise to do something that nobody has a legal right, that nobody already has a legal requirement to do, right? So, I'm already legally required to do something. A fireman is legally required to put out the fire in your house. They can't go, the fire department can't come to your house and say, hey, if you want protection, in the fire season, you gotta pay extra, right? They already have to do that, right? The performance of an action that one is otherwise not obligated to undertake, right? Similar, and refrain from an action that one has a legal right to undertake. So if I have the legal right to do something, but I'm giving up that right. If I tell my son, I'm gonna pay your tuition if you don't drink the entire time you're in college. He's already 21. He has the legal right to drink. If he gives up that right, that's consideration, right? That's his, yeah. Bargain for exchange, again, part of consideration. The second element is that it must provide the basis for the bargain struck between the contracting parties. So how do you say in English, tit for tat or something like that? I give you,
Quid
yeah.
pro quo.
Yeah, or quid pro quo, yeah. You get something for something. Adequacy of consideration. Adequacy involves how much consideration is given. It has to be stated on the contract, right? But do you think the courts, if the adequacy is not sufficient, maybe you're kind of feel like you got ripped off. Do you think you can go to the courts and argue, well, they sold me this, she sold me this car for $10,000, but afterwards I looked it up, it's only worth 2,000. Now I want to sue her. Yes,
I'd say only if they misrepresented the actual product.
yes, only if they misrepresented the actual product, and then it's not because of adequacy, but it's because of fraudulent misrepresentation, right? So yeah, if you get ripped off and you didn't do your research and you overpaid for something, unless it was fraudulent misrepresentation, you can't argue that in court, right? Yeah. You don't have to, nobody is required to sell you anything using the market price. If you're willing to pay more, that's fine. Can't argue about it afterwards. I'm going to skip this one. Pre-existing duties, I think I pulled up the full slides instead of my online lecture slides, so I'm gonna skip some of these here. Oh, some of the other things that will be on the contract, claims of settlement, release, agreement in which one party gives up the right to pursue legal claims against another party. Release of liability a lot of times. When you join, again, a good example is a gym contract. When you do join a gym, and a lot of you are parts of a gym or some kind of athletic thing, right? You do sign a release of liability saying if you get injured while using the facilities, you will not sue them because there's some risk involved, right? Covenant not to sue, an agreement to substitute a contractual obligation for some other type of legal action based on a valid claim. So again, there's an agreement that you're not going to sue. Yes.
Would buying out your contract be a type of release, or is that something different?
Buying out your contract, can you explain that?
Like I think I've heard for like employment contracts, like if you agree to be a certain amount of time with a company, otherwise you would have to pay back something?
If you what?
Like you would agree to be part of a company for a certain amount of time in exchange for like maybe like tuition, money or.
Oh, okay, so when you have a work agreement, employment agreement, and they give you a certain benefit like tuition, but they say after you graduate, you have to work with us for at least a year. Yes, and usually there would be a terms. If you don't, you have to pay us back the tuition, is what I
Yeah,
would say.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like you can do that and then
Yeah.
you get released. from the
It would
contract.
be very likely, yes, it would be very likely in that case, probably stated in the contract, right, yeah. Okay, oh, that was actually the last slide. Okay, let me stop sharing here. And let me stop the recording.